Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Hope everyone is well. Thanks for joining us. As you know, this is a special 8-week series in which we have the very modest goal of covering over 1,000 years of Islamic history. We'll do our best. There's a lot that we're going to miss, but we want to cover all of the major themes, and we want to put an emphasis also on the cultural changes and the interaction between Muslims and non-Muslims over the years, in addition to all of the conquest and the empires that, of course, are inevitably going to be mentioned. We begin in Allah's name, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa afdalu salati wa atammu taslim ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Allahumma anshur alayna rahmatak wa anzil alayna hikmatak ya dhal jalali wal ikram. We ask for Allah's mercy and wisdom and clarity. We're going to cover a lot of controversial topics in the very first and second sessions. So we're of course, I'll talk in a moment about the sources. We are relying on Sunni sources, of course, and many of the classical ones, also comparing other sources as well. So we're open to other viewpoints, inshallah. We're not trying to have a bias, but of course, inevitably we do have a bias, right? Because there's history and there's historiography. So we are clouded by the present in looking backwards in the history. But it's important because if you don't learn the lessons of history, you're doomed to repeat it. I put a quote there by President Dwight D. Eisenhower that civilization owes to the Islamic world some of its most important tools and achievements. The Muslim genius has added much to the culture of all peoples. This is important, especially for those that were raised in America. I don't know what your experience was growing up, but we talked about the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, then we sped up and suddenly we were in the Romans, and then from the Romans, we landed in the Renaissance. So between the Romans and the Renaissance, what did you learn? Absolutely nothing. So not only is Islamic civilization skipped in most of the social studies curriculum in the United States and in the West, actually it also omits East Asian culture as well and African culture. These are all, omitted, let alone other Aboriginal and other native peoples that are not mentioned. Forget about them. Even the major civilizations are not covered. So here is our methodology. We're going to talk about some of the major themes: rise and fall of empires, as I mentioned, cultural changes. I want you to be aware that the map doesn't correlate to conversion. And I'm going to repeat this point later on. At the height of the Umayyad Empire, the Muslim population is only 10%. Okay? So that means that 90% of the people under the height of the Umayyad dynasty are not Muslim, whether they are Hindu or Buddhist or Christian or Coptic Christian or Catholic Christian, or Jewish. The list goes on and on and on. So we need to be aware of what the interaction between Muslims and non-Muslim look like. We want to talk a little bit about scholarship. We're going to talk a little bit about the development of hadith, the development of fiqh and usul as well, and as I mentioned, non-Muslims. So quick summary: as you know, we had a series of 4 videos in which we talked about the Khulafa al-Rashidun, the Rashidun Caliphate. As you know, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Alaykum bi sunnati," that follow my sunnah, wa sunnata khulafa al-Rashidina min ba'di. As well, follow the tradition and the example of my rightly guided caliphs that will come after. He did not tell us how many they are, but all of us pretty much regard the Rashidun caliphs as, well, let's say them together in order: Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu an, and then Umar for the longest period, and then Uthman, and then Ali. Now, out of these 4, how many of them died natural causes? Only one. Only Abu Bakr radiallahu an died at a very old age, and the others, their life was cut short due to assassinations. And this is very significant because This is a very, we think of the Rashidun period as the golden age, the height of piety. We think of Umar radiallahu anh going through the nights in the streets of Medina, looking to see if there's anyone that's in need. We think of him spending the whole night in the affairs of the state and only taking a nap under the tree in Masjid Nabawi after the Asr prayer. And all of those accounts are true. There are many accounts of the Khulafa being like that. We know that Uthman ibn Affan, even in the time of being assassinated, he insisted that none of the governors should send troops to defend him. He could have stopped himself from being killed. But because he did not want any bloodshed in the city of the Prophet ﷺ, he denied that and he allowed that to take place. So these are very pious people. There's no doubt about it. There's agreement among all Muslims about that. Even among the Shi'is, they also agree on that point. During the Khulafa of Rashidun, we saw the end of the great Sassanid Empire. This was unforeseeable in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. We know the prophecy that he told Suraqa ibn Malik, who was chasing him during the time of the Hijrah, and he was thrown off of his horse 3 times, or in one account 3 times, in another account once. And the Prophet ﷺ gave him a promise and a guarantee that he would be wearing the bracelets and the jewelry of Kisra, right? That means the emperor of Persia, which was the other great power other than the Byzantines. No one could have imagined that only 50 years after, or less than that, from the passing of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the entirety of the Sassanid Empire would become Muslim lands. Now, it happened quickly in the Hira, which is the area of what we now regard as Iraq, but at that time was regarded as part of the Persian Empire, right? So the definition of Iraq has changed over time, but we're not getting into that, right? Then also they kept the Byzantines in check. It began with the Battle of Tabuk during the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which the Byzantines were amassing a huge army in order to destroy the Muslims in Arabia, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made a preemptive strike because they were making preparations. And it was kind of a stalemate, which was regarded as a victory during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, but it was not a decisive victory because they didn't weaken the Byzantine Empire, but that was good enough for that time. But after that happened, all of the area of Ash-Sham, so all of Syria, Damascus, Homs, going close to the area of Halab, Palestine, of course, all of this, we know the famous story of Umar entering into the city of Jerusalem peacefully because the Patriarch of Jerusalem handed over the keys, seeing the huge army that was over 100,000 that had amassed outside of Jerusalem. And as a result of that, those troops never entered into the city Jerusalem, and Muslims entered peacefully in there. Now, there's a little bit of Arabization that takes place, but in reality, there's not a lot of Arabization, because what ends up happening is that the bulk of, and we'll see it in the map, the bulk of the Muslim empire now is what was previously regarded as which empire? The Persian Empire. So in fact, in early Islamic history, there is a very, very heavy Persian influence. In fact, we see that a lot of the books, a lot of the literature, even the books about Arabic language, all of the early grammarians, right? They are all Persian. And that's, it's not a good or a bad thing. The reason is that the Arabs already spoke Arabic, so they didn't need to write books about Arabic. But later on, there's an Arabization process. They create institutions. They implement taxes. So there are 2 types of taxes, one of which is mentioned in the Quran. That is so zakat, yes, of course, that could be regarded as a form of tax. That is a form of prescribed alms, charity that's given from al-mal, from accumulated wealth. Now, in addition, there's another prescribed tax that goes to the state, right? And that is for the non-Muslims specifically. That is the tax of jizya. Jizya it's a small amount, but it is significantly more than zakat, right? And in addition to jizya, there was a second tax that was levied early on, and that is a land tax. Now, this is very interesting because there was no IRS at the time. I know there's some in Congress right now that wish that we also don't have IRS. They're working on that. But at the time, there was no income tax. And this is one of the problems later on that the Ottoman Empire struggled with. When everybody's Muslim, what loss of revenue do you experience? The loss of jizya. So what you're going to notice in a lot of the presentation is that conversions in Islamic history are almost in every case are discouraged. The state much preferred to collect taxes than for you to become Muslim. In fact, at the end of the Umayyad period, there's active discrimination against non-Arab converts, and because of that, this is one of the main factors, if not the reason, for the rise of the Abbasid Empire. Right? And we'll get to that inshallah shortly. They develop a little bit of a bureaucracy, but there's no post, there's no highway system, there's no system for trade. Even though they're part of the Silk Road, they don't have any systems there. But what ends up happening is that Uthman ibn Affan is murdered by rebels. So what ends up happening is Uthman ibn Affan, he appoints many of his own tribesmen from Bani Umayyah. And this is the same tribe that was ruling Quraysh at the time of the Prophet ﷺ in the form of, who's that? Abu Sufyan. So Abu Sufyan, right, which is one of the sons of Harb, is the chief among other chiefs, but he's the main chief of Quraysh. And then later on, Uthman ibn Affan becomes the Khalifa. And actually, he was almost not supposed to be the Khalifa because Umar radiallahu anh, he appointed 6 people. And he said, these 6 are going to decide who the Khalifa is. Do you know who the 6 voted for? They ended up with Uthman, but who did they vote for first? They voted for Ali ibn Abi Talib. But they asked Ali, they said, will you govern the same as your predecessors, as Abu Bakr and Umar? And he said, no, I will not. I can't promise that. And so because of that, more than half of them withdrew their support and they voted in favor of Uthman ibn Affan. And so as a result, Uthman became the Khalifa, but his Khilafah is widely regarded as very weak because it could be a personality thing. Some Muslims would say it's because of nepotism. Because Muawiyah is a tribesman, a distant relative of his. He appointed Abdullah ibn Sa'd after Amr ibn al-As as the governor in Egypt, who was a cousin to him. Actually, I think it's the cousin of Muawiyah, so they're all tribesmen. And these governors, Muawiyah and Abdullah ibn Sa'd, they have huge personalities. What ends up happening with a very humble and introverted person like Uthman? He gets pushed around. So whenever anything wrong happens, everybody blamed Uthman. And so as a result of that, Uthman ibn Affan received a delegation of not more than 1,000 people from Egypt. Now we call them rebels, but in the beginning, they said we came in order to petition the Khalifa because we had this list of grievances. They met with Uthman, they reached a compromise, and then they were leaving, and on the way, the deputy to Uthman sent a message with them, with the messenger. And as those rebels are traveling back to Egypt, they forced the messenger to open the sealed document. And they open the document, and guess what it says in the document to Abdullah ibn Sa'd? Anybody know? It says, when you open this message, kill all of them. So they just happened to open the message. When they read that message, they were outraged. Now, Uthman ibn Affan did not write that message personally, but he's the Khalifa, right? So they turned around, they went back to Medina, and they laid siege on his house with the intention of murdering him. And after many days, and we talked about it previously, Ali ibn Abi Talib, who in the beginning was not supporting Uthman, when people took out weapons and attacked Uthman ibn Affan, he went there personally. He brought his two sons, Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein, and they provided him with water and they defended him, but they couldn't prevent him from being killed in the end. And so he ended up being assassinated while he was in his prayer, and then Ali ibn Abi Talib became the Khalifa. Now, let's talk a little bit about what's happening other than politics. So Islam has spread during the Khilafah of Umar, and it continues during the time of Uthman ibn Affan, but it slows down during the time of Ali because now there's so many internal issues. But there's another thing that's happening, which is that politically Islam has reached all the way to Tunisia. We're going to talk about that. The Sahabi Uqba ibn Nafi', he is a very diplomatic person, and he's responsible for the west of Egypt. And what he ends up doing is he collaborates and he works with the Amazigh, with the Berbers in North Africa, starting in Libya. And he finds that actually the resistance is very weak from the Byzantines. And he also notices that in Egypt, how do the Coptic Christians feel about the Byzantines that are Orthodox, different type of Orthodox Christians? What ends up happening is a lot of the expansion of the Muslim empire is because of internal Christian divisions. So the Coptic Christians welcome Muslims with open arms because the Muslim treatment of Copts is very respectful and very on equal terms, whereas they were regarded as second-class citizens under the Byzantines. And similarly, the Amazigh that did not convert and did not become Christian, they also favored the Muslims over the Byzantines. And so we see that in a very short period, almost all of North Africa has become part of the Muslim empire with very little fighting. But in addition, many of the Amazigh tribes become Muslim. And that's mostly because of the diplomacy of Uqba ibn Nafi', who's well known in North Africa. So on the map it's shown as Berbers, but in fact the Berbers, they begin from Siwa, from the Siwa oasis in Egypt, and continue all the way until Mauritania. So in English we say Berbers, in Arabic, normally we say Amazigh, and the vast majority of them become Muslim very early on in the time of the Sahaba and the time of the Tabi'een. There's another thing. India is not part of the map. But would you believe that because of Muslim traders from Arabia and from Yemen and from Persia, that Islam has reached Kerala and has reached Tamil Nadu? And in fact, there are masajid that exist there that were established in the 630 and 640s. Very, very early in the lives of the Sahaba, right? In fact, there are some claims that Muslims reached southern India in the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it looks very credible. There's no way to confirm it, but this has been passed down from generation to generation. There's one of the masjids in Kerala that we mentioned, and one that's in Tamil Nadu as well. And we see that this whole coastal area, in which there's a high degree of interaction with Muslim traders, many of them become Muslim. At the same time, Umar ibn al-Khattab, he sends delegations to East Africa. He sends a delegation to Mogadishu, right? Which some people say that it means Maq'ad Shah, which is Farsi, for the seat of the king. Others, they say no, it's actually from one of the Somali languages. But Islam has reached Somalia, and again, without any armies, a large percentage of Muslims in Ethiopia, in Somalia, they become Muslim. This happens during the time of the Rashidun caliphs. And Islam also enters into Kenya. It enters into Kilwa, which is right on the coast of Tanzania, right? So It's Islam is starting to spread, and what's happening is that there are a lot of diplomatic efforts and delegations that are being sent. And in East Africa, language plays a key part. Swahili begins regarded, the development of Swahili in interacting with the Arabic languages becomes a way of spreading Islamic culture, right? And so people that embrace Islam and convert to Islam in East Africa, they have a sense of pride in their being Muslim. And in the past, so you'll see in different parts of Africa, so somebody is Hausa, somebody is Zulu, so they will follow the language of their tribe. But what ends up happening is that Swahili becomes a more of a pan-African language, right? That if a person enters into Islam, regardless of their tribal language, they will, in addition, they will also speak Swahili as a Muslim language, right? It's kind of similar to the Urdu language that some people regard as a Muslim language, but it's a little bit different because that one also had a political reasoning behind, whereas Swahili developed kind of naturally. So this is, Islam is spreading in every direction. Now, during the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan, there's a key player that's on the rise, and that is Muawiyah. Now, it's very difficult for Muslims to talk about Muawiyah. Why is it that we hear so many different versions about Muawiyah? Why do people get tense when you talk about Muawiyah? Because his son is Yazid, who is definitely, I think I can fairly say, is the #1 supervillain in Islamic history, right? Most of the Muslims will agree to that. Some will disagree. So his son is Yazid, so some of that is attributed to him. But also from the Sunni perspective, why do we get nervous about talking about Muawiyah? Because he broke the treaty with, yeah, but that didn't happen yet, but that's true. uh, well, Ali, with Ali, we're going to talk about that in a moment, inshallah. But what ends up happening is that you have a couple of the battles. I think I have that next, in which you have the Battle of Siffin, in which Ali and Muawiyah fight, and there's an agreement. But part of that is because Ali radiallahu anh, he doesn't want to see the bloodshed that's happening, and also because Ali is very suspicious of his own supporters. Many, the bulk of his supporters, not all of them, become Khawarij. And so they kind of exit the main army of Shi'at Ali, the supporters of Ali, and they become very extreme. And so Ali is concerned that should I really be associating with such people? But the reason that Muslims, especially Sunnis, are nervous is because Muawiyah is a Sahabi, right? He is a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yes, that's true. He is among the scribes that, not one of the main scribes, but one of the people that wrote the Quran, but he had many interactions with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And our belief as Sunni Muslims is that the best of generations is the Sahaba. So we regard them all as thiqa. They will have imperfections. They can make mistakes. So for example, when we talk about the battle of Al-Jamal, the battle of the camel, we're going to be very sensitive in how we talk about Ali, how we talk about Aisha radiallahu anha. Somebody might be right, somebody might be wrong, but we address it in a respectful manner. That there was miscommunication, which is in fact what happened. So quickly, Muawiyah becomes very powerful because Uthman is not checking his power. There's the Silk Road development. Muawiyah is also an expert trader. Their family are all traders, and they develop caravans, they develop rules and security, and trade really flourishes. Their successful campaigns against the Byzantines, so they venture in many different directions. He actually develops a navy and engages navally in the Battle of the Mass, right? Which was successful for the Muslims. They also attempted to siege Constantinople. It was a year or two, and it was very unsuccessful. They were not able to do that, but they were inspired by the narration from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, And as a result, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari is buried on the outside area of Istanbul. And if you go to Istanbul today, that whole area is known as Ayyub. And the Ottoman sultans, actually, they had a tradition before Mehmet al-Fatih, the one that opened Constantinople, that they would actually become the sultan. They would have the ceremony there in Ayyub as a reminder that this is an unfulfilled prophecy that at some time in the future is going to be fulfilled, inshallah. We talked about the governors, we talked about nepotism, the Egyptian rebels. When Ali karamallahu wajha becomes the Khalifa, he is located in Medina. And what is Medina filled with? Medina is filled with Khawarij, right? These are people that are extremists. These are the original ISIS, right? They're either with us or against us, right? So they were against Muawiyah and they were against Ali, radiallahu anh, because Ali compromised and made peace with Muawiyah. And so from them, he also became an enemy to them. So Medina, is that a good option? No. Then what about Damascus? The problem with Damascus is that there's kind of a very tenuous relationship between Muawiyah. Technically, Muawiyah is under Ali because Ali is the Khalifa. Muawiyah has not claimed to be the Khalifa. But everybody knows that right under the surface, there's a conflict that's brewing. So what he does is he consolidates his power by moving to Kufa, right? That's along the Euphrates River. And there's a lot of support for Ali radiallahu anh in Kufa. So he goes there. Now, after Ali becomes the Khalifa, everything hits the fan, right? Things don't go well. And this is not because of Ali radiallahu anh. In fact, many of his decisions are very wise. And he's very thoughtful. He's one of the most eloquent and most knowledgeable people. But he inherits a disaster, right? I mean, when he's from day one of his Khilafah, it's a mess. Muawiyah, he immediately demands that all of the rebels that assassinated Uthman be killed. Why is Muawiyah concerned about Uthman avenged? That's his cousin. That's his tribesman. That's number one. What's the second part? What does it give Muawiyah? It gives him an excuse to fight the Khalifa, because otherwise he can't say, I don't recognize Ali. Would there anyone in the Muslim world, would anyone accept that? Would Aisha support Muawiyah if he said that? Oh, I should be the Khalifa and not Ali? Who in the world is going to say that Muawiyah is better than Ali? Nobody was claiming that. Even Muawiyah didn't claim that. So because of that, you could, depending on your perspective, depending how jaded you are, you might say that Muawiyah used that as a pretext in order to engage Ali radiallahu anh. Now Ali, he wanted stability. This is one way of thinking it. Another way of thinking about it is that going after the rebels from Egypt would require him to go after his supporters. And so the question in Islamic history is, why did Ali not investigate the murder of Uthman? Why did he not seek justice? Now everything was already very tense. The ummah is all falling apart, right? And people are rebelling in every direction. So I think that here's my personal view, that even if Ali attempted to investigate the murder, he wouldn't have gotten very far because nobody would have cooperated with him. And those people were far away, and he would not have been able to do so. What ends up happening is the Battle of the Camel, in which Aisha radiallahu anha is on one side, and Ali is on the other side. Now, these parties did not intend to have a battle. This is very important. A lot of Muslims don't know that. They know that there was a battle. The reason that Aisha went there was in order to meet with Ali radiallahu anhu. They started talking and they started mediating. Now, what's the danger? I don't know if it's testosterone or something, but you have two big armies. What ended up happening? The two armies, they're parked just waiting for them to talk it out. What ends up happening? Somebody shoots an arrow. Until now, we don't know who did it first. But it wasn't Ali and it wasn't Aisha. Somebody started the fight and the battle began. Once the battle began, then they realized that this needs to stop. The battle was going in favor of Ali radiallahu anhu. But Aisha radiallahu anha, she withdraws. And look at the magnanimity of Ali radiallahu anhu. She has fought against the Khalifa in a battle, whether intentionally or unintentionally. He forgives her completely. And in fact, he sends troops to protect her and to return her back to Medina. So despite everything that happened, that relationship continues, perhaps out of respect for the Prophet ﷺ. So they had political differences, but they were not personal differences. The Battle of Siffin, that's a big chapter. Dr. Tariq has talked extensively about this in some of the khutbahs, in which he talked about the Quran being on the spears. Because in the battle, what ended up happening was the Khawarij, they said that we will not accept any hukum except for lillah. Inil hukmu illa lillah. So we don't recognize any authority except for God, right? So this is very, this is very ISIS-like type way of thinking, which is why that's really why we call ISIS Khawarij, right? Because it's a continuation of that way of thinking. And then Ali radiallahu anhu, he made some famous statements about how the Quran and the Sunnah, they're not self-executing, right? So it requires a human being to understand the Quran and to rule and to carry out all of that. Now Muawiyah, during this period, he continues raiding. He takes Egypt. He gets the credit, but in fact, Amr ibn al-As, the very illustrious companion of the Prophet ﷺ, is the one that does so. We just came back from Egypt, and part of that trip, we visited Amr ibn al-As and we visited his masjid, which previously was one of the largest masajid in Africa, and it was the very first masjid in Africa. At the time, Cairo was known as Fustat. That is a garrison city that was to the east of Cairo. And what ends up happening is Ali is assassinated by his own former support, by a Kharijite, is the one that assassinates him. So isn't it crazy that Ali and Muawiyah are fighting, but out of all of the people, who's the one that kills Ali? His own supporter. This is a conspiracy theory. There's no evidence for that. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So these are some of the accounts that could be true. I'm not saying they're not true, but we will never know. This is the problem, because what we know for sure is the Kharijites put it on their swords. Whether Muawiyah instigated it and told them to do that, I find that very far-fetched, because they hate Muawiyah. Why would they work with Muawiyah? So it could be true, but we don't know that for sure. And similarly, some people might say that Muawiyah wanted, we don't know that, but one person could infer that Muawiyah wanted Ali to die. But the fact of the matter is that we know the exact people that killed Ali, and they're not people from Muawiyah's clan. They're not supporters of Muawiyah. They are Khawarij. So it really requires you to adopt a kind of conspiracy theory, which I personally don't see any evidence. But could it be true? Yes, it absolutely could be true. We just don't have any evidence of it. Yeah. This is a fact. This is a fact. Yeah. Yes. And this is widely reported. So this is an important point, and this is one of the main things, because Muawiyah was incredibly popular during his time, not only in Syria, but people regarded him as the most professional leader, because he was a great diplomat. He was very good in interacting with people. He was very professional. He put the right people in all of the different positions. So there were a lot of good qualities to Muawiyah to consider. But one of the things that he did was he tried to turn the public opinion against Ahlul Bayt, against the family of the Prophet ﷺ, and he made it the state policy that not only in the Friday prayers that Ali should be cursed, but in fact Ali should be cursed in each of the 5 prayers. No. So even though Ali is entitled the Khalifa, Muawiyah, and by the way, this continued after Ali died, right? So this practice started before he died, but Muawiyah's control covers all of Ash-Sham, and it continues all the way touching into Persia, and he has influence into the Hijaz, into Arabia, and definitely into Egypt. So in terms of landmass, Muawiyah is effectively ruling more than Ali is, even though Ali is regarded as the Khalifa. Okay? And people are very mixed, because the people, they love Ahlul Bayt, they love the family of the Prophet ﷺ, they love Ali radiallahu an. But if you were to take a poll, in fact, a lot of people politically, they did support Muawiyah over Ali politically, right? And the way that he tried to turn people against Ali is by having that public cursing. This is one of the few things that Muawiyah did that also made people to dislike him. Now in 1661, Muawiyah, he leads an army into Kufa against Al-Hasan. So immediately when Ali passes away, the older grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, Al-Hasan, who is Sayyid Shababi Ahl al-Jannah, he is one of the masters of the youth in Al-Jannah, who is min Ahl al-Kisa, from the family of the Prophet ﷺ, who the Prophet ﷺ has praised in so many accounts. He becomes the Khalifa. But immediately, it's different from when Ali became the Khalifa, it's not recognized. Muawiyah, he takes an army to Kufa. So he's actually becoming aggressive in not recognizing Al-Hasan, and now Muawiyah is laying a claim to be not the Khalifa, but to be the Sultan. So this is a new concept. In 661, Al-Hasan, he signs an agreement with conditions that he will rule according to the Quran and the Sunnah, that he will stop the public cursing of Ali, and the main clause that's there is that it will not be a dynastic lineage, meaning that after Muawiyah dies, that the Khilafah will be open to whoever is there, which infers that either Al-Hasan or Al-Hussein, because they were the most well qualified out of the candidates that were available at the time. And Muawiyah, he declares himself after this agreement. Now, of course, this is one of the reasons that among Shia Islam, Al-Hussein is widely praised, and that is, of course, well earned. And Al-Hussein is also very beloved by all Muslims. But Al-Hasan is rarely mentioned. But among Sunni circles, in fact, we praise Al-Hasan as prioritizing peace and security over his own claim. Because, of course, Al-Hasan is more worthy of the Khilafah than Muawiyah, right? This is obvious. But because he doesn't want any bloodshed, he chooses to voluntarily accept those terms. Now, one of the reasons that he did that is because he felt that the people of Kufa were not really serious about fighting Muawiyah. So other people would say, well, if he were to fight, I mean, what's the point in doing so? Now, Muawiyah, he has this huge party. He sits on a throne. Muslims have never seen anybody sit on a throne, fancy clothes, you name it. The ceremony is in Jerusalem. I don't have any paintings, but they make paintings of that, and of course of those that come after him. And he reinstitutes public cursing of Ali radiallahu an in the prayers, which is contrary to the deal, right? Now, this is one of the statements that Muawiyah makes. He says, O people, by Allah, it is easier to move the firm mountains than to follow Abu Bakr and Umar in their behavior. But I have followed their way of conduct, falling short of those before me, but none after me will equal me in it. I'm going to make it simple. I'm not as good as the people before me, but the people after me, they're going to be worse, right? So don't be too tough on me, right? So this is Muawiyah. He's like, I'm not promising you that I'm a saint. This is his approach from day one. All right. But Muawiyah, as I mentioned, sometimes unfairly is lumped up and associated with Yazid. And in fact, I think that Muawiyah would have been horrified by the things that transpire after him. Now, in Bani Umayyah, you have 90 years of expansion. You have a huge court that's established. You have a huge library. This is before universities. Bayt al-Hikmah is established. Minority rights. In fact, he is married to a Christian woman and his wife is a poet. So he's married to a literate Christian woman. And so that sets the tone for the minorities, because don't forget, the majority of the people are non-Muslim, right? And so even in Ash-Sham, in greater Syria, the Muslim population at that point, it doesn't exceed 30%, right? At the periphery, it's even less. But even in the heart of the political center, the Muslim population is the minority. So when we talk about minority rights, it's very complicated. Actually, Muslims are the minority at that time. He's also a very skilled diplomat, and he goes after the Khawarij in a way that Ali was not able to do, and they go into hiding. They exist under the surface, but they're not active against Muawiyah. Muawiyah, he attempts to attack Constantinople, but they're not successful because of Greek fire. This is a special type of incendiary. It makes things burn, and they were able to attack the ships that the Muslims sent in the siege of Constantinople. There was also very bad weather. So the Christians, they said this is divine intervention, right? So that's their version, that God helped us against the Muslims, and that's why. And also there are other Muslims that said, well, it wasn't meant to be, right? They were not the army, they were not the righteous army. That, of course, the Ottomans, they will also support that account, that we're the righteous army that was supposed to conquer Constantinople and not that army. And they also established civil service as well. There are cultural changes. There's a lot of Greek influence. There's a lot of Persian influences. You have majority non-Muslims. To the chagrin of a lot of the Muslim scholars, you find wine is everywhere. Musical instruments are everywhere. So if you're imagining a very pious society in which everyone is covered and everybody is at the mosque, then that's not how it was, okay? That's not the actual accurate account, because the majority of the people are not Muslim, and many of these rules are not actually being enforced by the Umayyad. It's only later on, until Abdul Hakim and the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, in which the excesses of the Umayyads are kind of checked. In fact, Yazid is widely reported to have died in his bed with a glass of wine on his nightstand. And one of the people that lives in the court, he wrote that in his account, so it could in fact be true. We see beautiful Islamic art and architecture. We're going to show the Dome of the Rock very soon, inshallah. I have a picture right there of the mihrab in the Umayyad Masjid, and below it is the Bani Umayyah Masjid in Damascus. It is really incredible. You see beautiful mosaics. John the Baptist, Prophet Yahya is buried there. And what's one of the things that you notice about the architectural style? It's Christian. It is Christian. Early Islamic architecture is Christian architecture. In fact, many of the workers in the Dome of the Rock were Christian. Many of the engineers that worked on the Dome of the Rock, Qubat al-Sakhra, in Jerusalem, were Christian. Muslims didn't know how to make domes initially. Church towers are borrowed from minarets. Muslims invented the concept of a tower, and that was kind of borrowed in many of the Christian traditions. But Muslims did not have domes. Early masjid had open courtyards, and they had one or two. That was the architectural style. But because of the Christian influence, Muslims started to adopt domes. Of course, they were also in love with Hagia Sophia, right, in Istanbul, which is one of the most legendary buildings in history. And so that also kind of was aspirational for them. We see geometric arrangements, we see mosaics. Hadith is developing. You see that especially in Central Asia, in Persia, you see At-Tirmidhi, An-Nasa'i, Al-Bukhari, right? Where are these people coming from? From Bukhara, from Samarkand, they're in Uzbekistan, they're in Khurasan, parts of what we would regard as Persia, we would regard as Afghanistan. They are all at the periphery in the eastern fringes of the Islamic empire. Kalam, theology is developing. The science of tafsir is developing as well. We talked about Uqma and the Berbers. Cyprus becomes part of the Muslim empire. The island of Crete, from Greece, it also becomes part of the Muslim empire. Sicily, that happens a lot later. But Cyprus has been, Muslim land for a very, very long period of time, over 1,000 years, if I'm not mistaken. Then this is a photo of what Karbala looks like today. Okay, so of course this is a holy site for Shi'is. For Sunnis, we're saddened by what transpired, but the place of Karbala is like any other place, of course. And this is a beautiful poem that's penned by Imam al-Shafi'i. I've quoted it before, in which he talks about his heart being in a state of dejection and not being able to sleep because of wanting to send a message to Hussein about him sinless being slaughtered, and even the swords wailing and crying, and basically every single object and even the earth being saddened by the death of Imam al-Hussein. So how is it possible? I mean, this is one of the tough questions, that how did the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, only 60 years after the Hijrah, so less than 50 years after the Messenger ﷺ, how could that happen? How could such a tragedy take place? The Kufans, they send 600 letters to the house of Al-Abbas, where he is. Imam Hussein, he sends his cousin Muslim ibn Aqil. We saw him in Al-Baqir when we were in those that went for the Umrah trip. 18,000 Kufans, they give a pledge of support. So Muslim, he writes to his cousin and says, yes, they've given bay'ah, let's go. Now what does Yazid do, the son of Muawiyah? He changes the governor, because the old governor is not going to take those brutal measures. Did Yazid send the instructions that Hussein should be assassinated and killed, and the entire family of the Prophet ﷺ? I don't believe that's the case. There are many people who do believe that is the case, but I believe that he sent a very brutal general, Ibn Ziyad, one of the most ruthless people in history. So he gave him a blank check that get the job done. This is my interpretation, is that they didn't go over the nuts and the bolts, just get the job done. And the way that he got it done was that he took 4,000 people. In fact, he took the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, and they took his dead body and they hung it on the gates of Al-Kufa. People were so terrified when they saw this huge army from Ibn Ziyad. All of the Kufans, they stayed home. Can you imagine that? That there are thousands of people of Kufa, 18,000 pledged to defend Hussein. Do you know how many showed up? How many? None of them. No one showed up. So there are 71 people that are with Hussein radiallahu an, and the army of Ibn Ziyad sends the 4,000, and it is a bloodbath. I mean, it's as terrible as you can imagine. Now, as we mentioned, Muawiyah, he had appointed Yazid, and Yazid was actually unpopular. So it's very hard to understand, why did Muawiyah do that? Some people, they said he wanted to establish the rules of succession, so that way there's a system. As a result of that, you have the rebellion of Hussein, but that was a secondary rebellion. The major rebellion that happens is that of Abdullah ibn Zubair. So this is the son of the famous companion, Az-Zubair radiallahu an, and he starts a rebellion that continues and that is ultimately quashed in the time of Abdul Malik, who sends Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, who is the number 2 supervillain in Islamic history, but unlike Yazid, has some redeeming characteristics, right? After, when Yazid dies, Muawiyah number 2 becomes the Khalifa. Any guesses how long he's the Khalifa? Not 7 days. Some people say 18 days, some people say 4 months, but the most authentic narration is he is Khalifa for 2 months, right? And after that, he's very sickly person, and he dies in his younger 30s. When he dies, there is a crisis. Why is there a crisis? He doesn't have any children. So because of that, everybody, and you can name it, is claiming that, well, I'm the Khalifa or I'm the Sultan. But Marwan becomes the one that's successful. He is the cousin of Muawiyah. So the succession slides to the side within Bani Umayyah. Marwan is also a very ruthless kind of person. He's very unpopular. But after him, you have Abdul Malik. And finally, you have an extended period of stability until the rebellion of Mukhtar. So here's the map that we're talking about, in which everything gets consolidated under Abdul Malik. He looks like a friendly guy, right? That is from the Jordanian TV show about Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. He's the other famous villain. Lots of movies, lots of TV shows in the Middle East about Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. I mean, this guy would like kill people for breakfast. But he was brilliant and very intelligent, and he's a complicated person. He's a hafiz of the Quran. He's the person that organized the Mus'haf that we know. Dr. Tariq actually talked about him a few months ago in talking about the science of the Quran. But Hajjaj ibn Yusuf is focused on one main thing. What is that? To eliminate the rebellion of Abdullah ibn Zubair. Because Abdullah ibn Zubair has control of the majority of Al-Hijaz. Now, why is Al-Hijaz important? You have the Sultan up there, but who's ruling Mecca and Medina? They're under Abdullah ibn Zubair. So Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, he is on a mission. That is the task that he's been given by Abdul Malik. We'll talk about that in a moment. But during this period, if you ignore the political campaign, it is a period of extended peace. Conversions are discouraged. They changed the policy because they stopped conquering new lands. And we're winding down, by the way. They aren't collecting as much jizya, so what they do is they say that if you're a convert, you have to continue paying jizya. Now, what do you think the Islamic scholars said about that? They said, are you crazy? That's the exact opposite of what it says in the Quran. But they don't care, right? Now, it has a discriminatory effect. Why is that? Who are the new converts? Where are they from? They are non-Arab. Why are there no Arab converts anymore? All the Arabs are already Muslim. So what ends up happening is that if you are Arab, you're a first-class citizen. If you're non-Arab, you're a second-class citizen. It caused a lot of social problems, and this ended up leading to the demise of the Umayyads. They start minting coins. After Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, he destroys the Kaaba with catapults. He eliminates Abdullah ibn Zubair. In fact, they kill him in front of the Kaaba, mutilate his body. The Kaaba, most of the Kaaba is destroyed. and they rebuild the Kaaba during the period of Abdullah ibn Zubair. They included, does anyone know that ring that's next to the Kaaba? That's Hijr Ismail, the Hatim. He had expanded the Kaaba to include that. Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, he repairs the Kaaba and returns it back to the footprint during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Arabic becomes the official language. You have great prose, beautiful writers. And then you have Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who is regarded as the fifth Khalifa. Why is he regarded that way, even though there are only four? But what's different about Abdullah ibn Abdul Aziz, about Umar? He's even called Umar number 2. Why? What's special about him? He's not from the same family. Umar al-Khattab is from Banu Adi, which is a diplomatic family, and Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is from Bani Umayyah. So they're from the family of Uthman and Muawiyah and all of them. But why is he called Umar number 2? Why is it? Because he is so pious. He takes the whole empire and brings it back away from the politics. He is a true zahid, a spiritual ascetic person. He's very just. And like all good people, what happens to him? He gets killed. This is the moral of the story. If you're good, you're going to die, right? That's basically the theme of the presentation. He's so pious. In fact, people could not distribute zakat money because no one was hungry from Tunisia until India, right? But what ends up happening is, guess who kills him? His own family, because they don't want that. This is the Dome of the Rock. Remember how I mentioned it's designed by Christians? If you have the privilege of going to the Dome of the Rock, this is built in the time of Bani Umayyah. You can see the beautiful mosaics and calligraphy, verses from the Quran, and a very unique architectural style, right? And the arches are also very similar to what you see in Al-Andalus. Okay, now for the last part of the presentation, we're going to talk about, leave the politics behind. Let's talk about things expanding. Anatolia, the eastern part of Turkey today, it becomes part of the Muslim lands. Even though there was a peace treaty with the Byzantines ended up attacking. There are a lot of questions about why they did that. Very foolish, but I think they thought, well, they're getting stronger, so let's go for it now. Armenia, as a result, also becomes part of the Umayyads lands. In India, in addition to southern India, does anyone know where Dibul is? It exists today in Sindh. It is a port. It is the fort that exists right on the side of Karachi. If you're from Pakistan, you should know about this, right? So this is the place that Muhammad bin Qasim al-Thaqafi attacks, and he comes with 5 catapults. He brings a navy, and he receives supplies coming from Afghanistan and Balochistan, right? And as a result, they are very successful. They capture Sindh, and in addition, they capture half of Punjab. And they reach Multan, it also becomes part of that. They don't reach to Lahore and the other areas or like into India, like Amritsar. They don't reach to those until much, much later. But very early on, they enter into all the way up until Multan. Now, one of the interesting things is that after that military victory, they are expanding and moving. Any ideas why they're able to move so fast in India? Now, in the Hindu society, how is the Hindu society structured? What type of system? They have a caste system. And in that caste system, there's no clear place for Buddhists, right? Because the whole system is designed really for Hindus. And so there's huge conversions, especially from Buddhist into Islam and from the lower caste. They also convert in large numbers in Sindh, and you see that actually the percentage of Muslims in today's Pakistan very early on becomes very high. A lot of conversions in India, but at the same time, Muhammad bin Qasim al-Thaqafi, he's very intelligent. He has a decision. The Quran talks about Ahl al-Kitab. about the Jews and the Christians. We have a lot of guidelines in Islam about how to treat Jews and Christians. What does he do with Hindus and Buddhists? He implements a rule that all of the rulings about Christians and Jews will also be extended to Hindus and Buddhists as well. And so as a result, none of the Hindu shrines, none of the Hindu places, temples are affected, and nobody is harmed. And what that ends up doing, it increases the popularity of the Muslims. Even though they're an invading army, they're welcomed by many of the local population. Anas ibn Malik, he passes away at the age of 103. Tariq ibn Ziyad, who's the governor of Tangiers in Morocco, he crosses into Gibraltar, Jabal Tariq. The famous story is that they burn all of the ships and they say the sea is behind us and the army is in front of us, so help us God. And they are very successful. They have the Battle of Guadalete, in which they go all the way against the Visigoth king, King Roderick, who is also very unpopular in Spain. This is a common theme in Islamic history, you know, that they end up being more popular than the people they're conquering. And they reach the west of France and the Battle of Tours. And the Muslims are defeated in that battle. Now, a lot of Europeans give this a lot of weight. What do a lot of Europeans say? This is our last slide, yeah. What do they say about the Battle of Tours? The Orientalists, they're obsessed with this battle. Why? Yes, they said, we won. We stopped the Muslims. It was a tiny battle. It was like 10 or 15,000 people. So they were not mobilizing a huge army to attack all of Europe. And Europe also, if they thought that the Muslims were coming, they would have defended, right? So sometimes people are a little too passionate when they talk about history. The last slide we're going to talk about is Andalus. And we're going to talk about it later. But Islam in Spain and North Africa, where there's a beautiful Andalusian culture. The Jews thrive there. So as you know, you have Jews from the Middle East. Anybody know what they're called? These are not Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi are the ones from Europe. The ones they are Mizrahi. They're the ones from the Middle East, and the ones that are from North Africa, Morocco especially, and Spain, they are called Sephardic, right? So the Sephardic Jews, they have a very large population in Spain. Christians also thrive in all of the cities. They have different quarters. They have universities, gathering places. It's a city of gardens. There's a huge aqueduct. After they won the Battle of Guadalete, Toledo was the capital. Muslims, Granada comes much later. So Toledo is there. Cordoba is the main city. They have fountains, canals. They have a post system. Hebrew is preserved. The Hebrew language almost doesn't exist anymore. Muslims revive Hebrew. And initially, it's written in the Arabic text. For most of history, Hebrew is written in Arabic. I bet you didn't know that, right? And then you have some great Islamic thinkers, Ibn Hazm, Ibn Rushd, the great philosopher. You have Lumna al-Qurtubiyya. She's a woman. She's the official librarian of Cordoba. So you see, not only men are involved in the society in Andalusia, but there are a lot of great women as well. So this kind of concludes our presentation for the first period. The next time that we gather, inshallah, we're going to talk about the Abbasid period, which is regarded as the golden period in terms of civilization, in which we're going to talk about science and art and innovation, inshallah. We'll give a few minutes to questions. And we have the chat open as well. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So why did Ali say, oh, this is a great question. Why did Ali say he wouldn't rule the same way? We're going to need a microphone as well. So Ali radiallahu an, Uthman was not a professional politician. You know, we love Uthman as one of the most pious people ever to walk the face of the earth, but he was not a politician. So he made a lot of political mistakes. He appointed some bad people to different posts. Some people, they said it's because of nepotism. Others, they said that it was because he was a very passive person. So people that had influence from his family and people that were advising him gave him bad advice. So Ali was saying that no, he is going to centralize control. The governors like Abdullah ibn Sa'ad and Muawiyah, they're going to have to listen to him. This is how people understood it. And the others, they felt that no, if he rules with a heavy hand, then that's not going to bring people together. And that's why they thought that, uh, well, actually, that's not true because Uthman, he hadn't been the Khalifa yet. Why is it that he wouldn't follow Abu Bakr and Umar? It's a good question. What is it that he would do differently? I'm not sure. Never thought about it. We'll think. I'll think about it and I'll tell you next week, inshallah. Okay. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Okay. As Islam spread northward, what kinds of campaigns offensive? Could you elaborate on that? We ended up mentioning that. His father was Abu Sufyan. Yeah. We say the Khulafa are the best. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Khayrul quruni qarni, thumma alladhina yalunahum, thumma alladhina yalunahum." The Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned 3 generations. The best generation are my generation, the Sahaba. So how do we reconcile the best of generations start falling apart so quickly after the Prophet's death? What this shows is that power corrupts, and just because you have the presence of the best people doesn't mean that power is not going to enter within the society. There's also a lot of miscommunication, especially between Ali and Aisha. People are not talking to each other, they're getting partial information, there's no centralized control. So if what had happened is like what happened in the life of Umar, in which every governor answers back to Umar, there's no chance of miscommunication. So decentralization caused a lot of problems. If Muawiyah asked to curse Ali, why does Sunni Islam have a hard time calling him out? No, we do call him out. We call Muawiyah out for him cursing, for having that policy. But it's different because among Shi'is, they will curse Muawiyah or they will call him you know, by names that suggest that he's a sinner or he's a bad person. So we can point out mistakes and errors without talking about the evilness of a person. This is my approach, but it's up to you how you want to approach this. Allah, I wish we can decide who goes to Jannah. I'll put all of you guys, right? But we don't get to decide that. This might be a philosophical. Many people say that in Islam, conflict is not condoned if one is the aggressor, only allowed in self-defense. However, in early Islamic empire dynasties, there are several instances of Muslim invasions initiated by Muslims. That's true. What is the thought behind this discrepancy? Is there anything more than the fact that older civilization operated somewhat differently than current nation states? That is true, but there's a second point, which is that these were not offensive wars for the sake of just acquiring new territory. In the past, in Islamic history, people were not allowed to practice Islam. So the Prophet ﷺ had told the companions that if you are an invading army, then you have to first send a messenger. And if that land pledges that people will be able to practice Islam and they accept that and they make a peace treaty with you, then you're forbidden from attacking them. Now, is that what happened? With the Byzantines, it didn't happen. They did not want to allow Islam to exist within their lands, and also it did not happen with the Persians. So as a result, there were offensive battles between the Muslims and the Byzantines as well as the Persians. Theoretically, one could have said that they could have made a peace treaty. That did happen later with the Byzantines in Anatolia and Armenia and the northern parts of Syria. There was a peace treaty between the Muslims and the Byzantines, and it was the Byzantines that broke it. So this is perhaps a sanitized version of history, But at the same time, I think the Byzantines broke it because they were surrounded by Muslims. So they said, well, we need to get ahead of this. But in Islamic history, you see that the armies um, operated in a different way because only the Muslims had a heterogeneous society. In Europe, there's no concept of being not Christian. This is a big part of the anti-Semitism, right, that you find in Europe. But especially the anti-Semitism is stronger than the anti-Muslim sentiment. But Europeans did not allow Islam to be practiced, right? That's part of the European legacy, and that changed in some places, Italy, for example, and of course in the Americas, but that was the general practice. And so as a result, these military expeditions happen in order to facilitate that. Are there any questions that we have in person here? Yes. I don't remember the name. Do you remember the name? It was his deputy.
But he didn't see it?
No, Marwan. But Marwan is not there in Medina. Yes, actually, that's true. That's the one. Yeah, yeah.
I've heard of that name,
Marwan.
but my major concern is, did Uthman know what was in the letter?
No, he didn't. And the rebels, they don't even. He's the Khalifa. They hold him responsible. So it doesn't matter whether Uthman wrote the letter or not. To them, to the rebels, it didn't make any difference, right? They hold him responsible because he's the boss. Right.
Just trying to understand, like, what was the point of the letter?
Oh, that it was to the governor of Egypt that when you receive this message, kill them all.
I know, I understand
Yeah.
the contents there. But what was the point of giving a letter to them if Uthman knew that they were carrying a letter? So he should have known, like, what was that for? Why did he send a letter?
I don't know if Uthman knew they were carrying a letter. Yeah.
Plus, it doesn't make sense. If he wanted them to be killed in Egypt, why wouldn't he kill them in self-defense when they're surrounding his house?
That's true. That's very true.
You mentioned the cousin of Hussein al-Islam.
Yes, Muslim ibn Aqil.
Yeah, cousin from which side, fathers or mothers? And
Okay.
who are the other cousins? Because we have to understand that. We thought that with Kufa, the tragedy, or Karbala, almost all were killed.
Actually, okay, so Karbala, we'll talk about that. So Muslim ibn Aqil, if I'm not mistaken, it's from the father's side, right? But it's different from like Ali and Hassan and Hussein because these are from the Fatimid line. But Muslim ibn Aqil, he's from the family of the Prophet ﷺ. He's the first cousin of Ali ibn Abi Talib from the father's side, from Abu Talib, right? So it's not a descendant of the Prophet ﷺ, it's to the side. Now, in terms of Karbala, all of the males are killed except for Zayn al-Abidin, right? Now also later on you have the Mukhtar rebellion, you have Muhammad al-Hanafiya, right? Who is the brother of Ali radiallahu anh, and he also survives as well because he's not there. But Ali, his name is Ali, we know him as Zayn al-Abidin, as the great-grandson of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is a direct descendant of the Prophet. He's in the Imamat for the Shias, right? And also extremely well-loved among Sunnis, and a very prolific writer and thinker, beautiful poet. So Zayn al-Abidin is the one that continues the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ. He's known to have married a huge number of women. I don't know the number. But any idea why? Yes, he is the only male descendant. So he's like, I'm on a mission, right? Not to get too explicit, but he's on a mission to create as many, to keep the line going and to create as many descendants of the Prophet ﷺ as possible. And because of him, pretty much all of the people that have a claim, there's a disagreement about who's the descendant of the Prophet ﷺ, but for the sake of argument, pretty much all the descendants come through Zayn al-Abidin. And that's because he was sick. He wasn't feeling well and he was young. They're not all buried in Iraq because Al-Hussein is there in Karbala, but also we believe that the skull of Al-Hussein was transferred to Asqalan which is right on the side of Gaza, and then from there during the Crusades was transferred to Cairo. And so we visited Al-Hussein when we went to Cairo. But also the women, they had to march and go from Karbala back to Damascus. And so most of the women, they're all buried in different places. Zayn al-Abidin, you know, he ended up in Medina and also was in Damascus as well. Yes, Chavez? Yes.
You mentioned Muhammad bin Qasim al-Thaqafi.
Yes.
He was sent by his uncle
Yes.
while he was innocent.
Yes.
And who was his uncle? Al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf.
Al-Thaqafi. Yes.
So that's another layer of complexity for that character.
So this complicates things because Muhammad bin Qasim al-Thaqafi is, especially among Pakistanis, is a huge hero, right? People, he's a legendary name. I mean, for all India, what's Pakistan and India? It's all the same, right? Right? So it's one history, right? So Muhammad bin Qasim is one of the heroes of Islamic history, but it's very tough to reconcile because his uncle, right? His uncle is like one of the most brutal people. And in fact, Muhammad bin Qasim al-Thaqafi, after he's successful in conquering Karachi, he is recalled back to Damascus. He comes back to Damascus and the new Khalifa kills him. Because of the Thaqafi name, he's associated, so the name is toxic, right? So it's hard for him to rule because he's associated with his uncle. So people think that he's crazy like his uncle. And so he ends up dying that way. But I didn't find any examples of Muhammad bin Qasim being brutal the way that his uncle is. So I think he just bad luck, you know, that he had that name. Okay.
One other, you might, beyond the key differences between the Sunni and Shia.
Mhm. Mhm.
Is there any
Yeah.
attempt to kind of reconcile, make peace, create understanding?
So the question for those listening is about Sunni and Shi'i. We are going to talk about that next week, inshallah. So I'm going to reserve the answer for that time. There have been efforts to reconcile, but I want everyone to realize we have covered 100 years of history today. Do Shi'is exist? They don't exist yet. There are supporters of Ahlul Bayt, they're supporters of Ali, they're supporters of Hussein. There's even supporters of the Mukhtar rebellion, which is the beginning of Shi'ism. But Shi'i Islam, especially the 12ers version, does not really exist. There are a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to save them and we'll answer them next week, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase us in knowledge, give us clarity. Hopefully we didn't put too much doubt in your minds. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يقربنا إليك. And may Allah grant victory and comfort and ease the condition of our brothers and sisters in Gaza. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.